He walked into the gala in a tuxedo, carrying a silver tray, only to be mocked, ordered around, and humiliated by the richest people in the room. But this wasn't a mistake. It was his choice. Why was Keanu Reeves secretly serving apple cider to dying children? And what did he whisper that changed everything? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The ballroom shimmered like something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. Tall glass windows reflected the glow, stretching the radiance across the polished marble floor. Each table was draped in ivory linen, topped with fresh orchids, polished silver, and place cards printed in gold foil. The Beverly Hills Children's Foundation Gala had officially begun. Outside the hotel, photographers shouted names as A-list celebrities stepped onto the red carpet. Inside, servers in black bow ties weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Wealthy donors adjusted their cufflinks, posed for pictures, and sipped vintage wine, barely glancing at the handful of children seated in the front near the stage. These were the true guests of honor. Children in wheelchairs and hospital beds, each one quietly battling something no child should ever have to face. And yet, they were smiling. 8-year-old Maya Chen sat close to the front, her lavender dress tucked neatly beneath her legs, her wheelchair adorned with tiny glow-in-the-dark planets she had glued on herself. Her eyes, though tired, lit up with wonder as she looked around the room. This was her first time outside the hospital in over 2 months. A purple beanie covered her bald head, decorated with embroidered stars her grandmother had stitched with love. Space was her dream, and tonight, everything felt like another world. Behind the scenes, a quiet door opened. No one noticed him enter. No cameras clicked. No one turned to greet him. The man walked in through the service hallway, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, his hair tied back, his shoulders relaxed. He carried a silver tray of sparkling apple cider meant for the children, non-alcoholic, chilled and bubbling with tiny gold flecks that caught the light. He walked calmly, like he belonged, like he'd done this before. No security escort, no assistant, just him, the tray, and a quiet presence that didn't scream for attention. "Excuse me, waiter," a woman in a sequined red gown called out. Her voice was sharp, loud enough to turn a few heads. The man stopped. She snapped her fingers and pointed at her table. "My husband is waiting on the shrimp cocktail. We've asked twice." He looked at her, nodded with a soft smile, and said only, "I'll see what I can do." Then he kept walking. Past her, past the table, past the dozen eyes beginning to squint at him in confusion. A man with slicked back hair and a designer watch raised his glass. "Refill, please. Don't make me wait." Still, he didn't pause. He was headed toward the front, toward the children. From her chair, Maya watched him carefully. Something was different about him. He didn't move like the other servers. He wasn't rushing, and his hands didn't shake. His grip on the tray was steady, like it was second nature. But it wasn't just that. It was his eyes. Calm, kind, familiar somehow, though she couldn't place why. And then it happened. He stopped walking. A woman with a diamond necklace the size of a tennis ball blocked his path and tapped him sharply on the shoulder. Her voice cut through the ballroom. "Waiter," she snapped. "This champagne is warm, unacceptable. Bring me a cold glass right now." He turned to face her, still holding the tray. His expression was polite, still calm. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding, ma'am," he said softly. She raised an eyebrow. "I don't care about your confusion. Just do your job. Get me my drink." Other guests nearby began to whisper. A few stood from their tables. Voices rose. Faces turned. "Where's the manager? Unprofessional. Is this how you treat your donors?" The murmur swelled. People craned their necks to get a better look. The man didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He simply turned away. and walked straight toward Maya. He approached slowly, the silver tray still balanced perfectly in his hands. His eyes met Maya's, and she felt a sudden wave of calm settle over her. The chaos behind him seemed to blur into silence. All she could see was this man, this strange and gentle waiter, who looked at her not with pity, but with warmth. He stopped beside her wheelchair and knelt, lowering the tray until it was level with her small arms. "Would you like some cider?" he asked, voice low and sincere. Maya nodded. "Yes, please." As he gently handed her a glass, her nurse leaned in. "Thank you," she said politely. But the man simply smiled and looked back to Maya. "You like space," he said, glancing at the decorations on her wheelchair. She blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" He pointed to the Saturn sticker on her wheel, then the little Mars keychain hanging from her seat. "Saturn's rings. Mars's red dust. I figured you must be a fan." Maya grinned. "I want to be an astronaut." "That's a good dream," he replied, settling into a chair beside her. "The best kind." Behind them, the ballroom buzzed. Guests began approaching the event coordinator, upset that the waiter had walked away mid-service. Complaints rolled in about drinks, appetizers, professionalism. The tension built. But up front, none of it touched Maya and the man in the tuxedo. She watched him carefully. "Your hands," she said. "They're not like the other waiter's hands." "Oh?" he said with curiosity. "They're smooth, not dry or cracked. You don't do dishes all day, do you?" He chuckled softly. "No, I don't. Are you an artist?" "Something like that," he answered with a tilt of his head. Maya leaned forward. "What's your name?" He paused for a moment, then smiled. "You can call me Keanu." Maya tilted her head, puzzled. "Keanu? Like Keanu Reeves?" He raised his eyebrows and gave her a playful wink. "Something like that." Before she could ask more, the host of the evening took the stage. The lights dimmed and the spotlight hit the microphone. The crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began. "Before we continue tonight's program, I need to acknowledge someone very special." Maya turned back to the stage. Keanu remained seated beside her, silent, unmoved. "This person has been quietly serving our children tonight," the host continued, "without seeking attention or applause. Many of you mistook him for waitstaff, and yet he chose to serve without correcting anyone." A murmur spread through the room. Confusion. Whispers. Clarissa Langston stood up from her seat, face pale. The host smiled. "It is my honor to introduce him to you properly. Please welcome a man who embodies humility and grace, Mr. Keanu Reeves." The room fell silent, the silence of disbelief. Maya looked at him again, and this time she knew exactly who he was. The ballroom froze. Guests stared, stunned, as the host announced the man they had mistaken for a waiter. Mr. Keanu Reeves. Clarissa Langston's mouth dropped open. Whispers turned into gasps. A few people covered their faces, realizing they had barked orders at someone they now recognized from movie screens and magazine covers. Phones came out. But Keanu didn't move. He sat quietly beside Maya, still at her eye level. "You're really him," Maya whispered, wide-eyed. Keanu smiled gently. "And you're really brave." She looked down at her apple cider, then back up at him. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He shrugged lightly. "I wasn't here for them." The crowd remained standing, waiting for him to walk to the stage. The host gestured, unsure what to do. But Keanu stayed where he was. He took a paper napkin from the table, scribbled something on it, and handed it to Maya. She opened it and read silently. Her eyes watered. Then she looked back at him and smiled. Behind them, Clarissa stepped forward and said loudly, "You let me humiliate myself." Keanu looked up slowly. His expression never changed. "I chose to be mistaken," he said, "because tonight wasn't about me. It was about them. He nodded toward the children. The room went completely quiet. Then, slowly, the applause began. Tentative at first, then louder, then unstoppable. Keanu stood, not for a speech, but to place the tray gently in Maya's lap. She lifted it, proudly. And just like that, a girl with no hair and a galaxy in her heart became the brightest star in the room. And the man they tried to shame, he became the reason everyone would remember this night forever. The entrance hall of the Beverly Grand Hotel sparkled with quiet luxury. Velvet ropes lined the walkways. Cameras flashed as limousines pulled up and names were whispered to photographers who scribbled them down. This was the annual gala for the Beverly Hills Children's Foundation, and tonight's event promised more than glitter. It promised hope. Inside, the ballroom looked like it had been painted out of a fairy tale. High ceilings stretched above crystal chandeliers, their dangling gems shimmering like stars. The floors were polished marble, gleaming beneath the feet of hundreds of well-dressed guests. Round tables spread across the hall, each one set with precision. White linen cloths, folded napkins shaped like lotus flowers, and centerpieces filled with pale roses and tall candles that flickered softly. The hum of laughter and clinking glasses floated through the air. At the far end of the room, near the stage, sat the real guests of honor. Children. Some in wheelchairs, some in hospital beds with IV poles beside them, all dressed in their finest clothes, trying to feel like part of the world that too often forgot they were there. Volunteers crouched beside them, fixing hair ribbons, tucking jackets into place, offering them cups of sparkling cider. Maya Chen was among them. She was 8, quiet and noticeably thinner than the year before. Her lavender dress had small embroidered moons and stars that glittered when she moved. A soft purple beanie sat snug on her head, covering the effects of chemotherapy. Her wide brown eyes took in the chandeliers, the flowers, the colors, and the people with cautious wonder. She had imagined what this night would look like, but she had never imagined anything like this. Her nurse, Layla, wheeled her gently toward the front. "Let me know when you want a break," she whispered. Maya nodded. She was nervous, but the nervousness melted each time she looked around. Everything felt so big, so bright, so full of possibility. To most of the guests, the children were part of the decoration, seated like ornaments to inspire donations. A few came by to shake hands and offer thin compliments. Others dropped folded checks into gold boxes and posed for photos with the foundation's banner in the background. The foundation director, James Avery, moved through the crowd with a practiced smile. He was good at charming donors. He remembered names, favorite wine types, and what universities their children attended. Tonight he had an ace up his sleeve, though he hadn't told most of the staff. One of the volunteers leaned in to whisper, "Any truth to the rumor?" Avery didn't smile, just a small nod. "You mean he might actually show up?" He said he would, quietly. "Seriously?" Elle requested to enter through the service hallway. No red carpet, no spotlight. Why would someone like that want to go unnoticed? Avery's eyes shifted toward the front of the room, toward the row of children. "For the same reason the right people come to this gala every year," he said. "To listen, not to be seen." Maya sat near the front, her hands folded in her lap as the music from the string quartet drifted gently through the air. She kept glancing toward the stage, where a giant screen showed a slideshow of smiling children in hospital gowns, some of them waving, some mid-treatment, all of them hoping for better days. Her own picture had flashed across the screen earlier, and she'd felt a wave of heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't wanted to be in the spotlight, but she did want people to remember that kids like her had dreams too. "Do you want to go closer to the stage?" Layla asked softly. Maya shook her head. "I like it here." She could see everything from this spot. The chandeliers, the tall, important-looking guests in suits and gowns, the flowers arranged like miniature galaxies at the center of each table. She even spotted a little boy 2 seats down, who had built a rocket out of breadsticks. She smiled. All her life, Maya had loved space. She read books about planets when other kids were playing with dolls. She watched documentaries on black holes and supernovas during her long hospital nights. Her favorite place at the hospital wasn't the playroom. It was the rooftop, where she could see the stars when she was strong enough to go outside. The doctors said her illness made her body weak, but they couldn't touch her curiosity. They couldn't reach the place where her dreams lived. Suddenly, the music faded, and a woman with a clipboard tapped the microphone at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner will be served shortly. Afterward, we'll begin tonight's program with a very special announcement from the Foundation." At that same moment, the service hallway at the back of the room opened briefly. A tall man in a black tuxedo stepped through. No one noticed. No spotlight followed him. He wasn't escorted in with fanfare or applause. He carried a silver tray of sparkling apple cider and began weaving slowly through the crowd. James Avery noticed. From across the ballroom, he locked eyes with the man for just a second. A nod passed between them. Quiet, respectful, coordinated, and then the man disappeared into the sea of black suits and glittering gowns. The waitstaff, busy carrying plates of roasted chicken and artfully arranged vegetables, barely registered him. But the guests certainly did. "Waiter," one woman called out. Another waved a hand. "Over here, please. We're ready for wine." The man said nothing. He simply kept walking, calm, collected, purposeful. James watched carefully. His heart beat a little faster. No one at their table had noticed. Not yet. Not the donors, or the reporters, or the woman in the red gown who had complained earlier that the roses at her table were too yellow. But something was happening. Something very few would understand until it was too late. And it was, walking straight toward the children. At the front of the ballroom, Maya's nurse leaned over. "Would you like something to drink?" Maya nodded. "Maybe just some cider?" Layla turned to flag down a server, but before she could, the man in the tuxedo approached. He carried the tray with quiet grace, not rushed, not distracted. His movements didn't match the rhythm of the others. He wasn't dodging guests or darting between tables. He moved like time wasn't chasing him. He stopped in front of Maya, lowered the tray, and knelt so their eyes met. "Sparkling cider?" he asked gently. Maya blinked. The way he asked felt different, like he wasn't offering her a drink. He was offering her a moment. "Yes, please," she whispered. He handed her the glass with both hands, steady and slow. The golden bubbles fizzed softly inside the crystal flute. She took it carefully, staring at him. She didn't know why, but something in her chest stirred. "You have stars on your dress," he said. Her eyes widened. "Do you like space?" He smiled. "Very much." Maya tilted her head. "Are you a scientist?" "No." "An actor?" He paused, then said, "Not tonight." She giggled. "You're not like the other waiters." "What makes you say that?" "Your hands," she said. "They're soft. The others have cracked fingers from hot water." He didn't answer, just smiled, as if she'd passed some kind of quiet test. "Thank you for the cider," she added. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, still kneeling beside her, he replied, "Thank you for noticing." Across the ballroom, James Avery watched the moment unfold. He could feel it. This was why the man had come. Not for photos. Not for applause. The event's MC stepped to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for being here tonight. In just a few minutes, we'll begin our program, but before we do, I've been asked to make an unexpected announcement." The crowd quieted. James looked toward the man in the tuxedo, who was still kneeling beside Maya, now speaking softly with the other children. No camera had caught his entrance. No guest had recognized him. But the moment was already shifting. The MC adjusted the microphone. "Some of you may have noticed a member of our staff quietly serving cider this evening. What you may not know is that this man is not part of our wait team." People glanced around. whispers began. Please join me in welcoming someone who came tonight not for attention, but to honor these children in his own quiet way. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the MC continued. Mr. Keanu Reeves. Dozens of heads turned. Maya blinked, then turned slowly toward the man beside her. He was already standing, and the entire room was about to realize what she already felt in her heart. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to serve. The service hallway behind the ballroom was narrow, dim, and quiet. A few staff members stood near the kitchen doors reviewing table assignments, adjusting their aprons, and preparing the next wave of plated entrees. Amid them, Keanu Reeves stood in silence, dressed in the same black and white uniform, but his tuxedo wasn't rented, and his hands weren't trembling like the younger servers rehearsing their lines. He was calm, intentional, and unlike the others, he wasn't looking for direction. In his hands, he held a silver tray of sparkling apple cider, the kind made specially for the children who couldn't drink what the adults were sipping. Each glass shimmered under the hallway's yellow lighting, the bubbles rising slowly like stars trying to escape gravity. He stared at the tray for a moment, then took a quiet breath and stepped forward. The ballroom doors opened, and Keanu entered through the side, blending into the background like a shadow cast in warm light. He moved smoothly between servers and guests, each step deliberate. His goal wasn't to be noticed. It was to see and to serve. The first guest to intercept him was a woman with sleek blonde hair and a black velvet gown. She turned abruptly, nearly spilling her drink, and caught sight of the tray. "Ah, thank God," she said, plucking a glass off it. Then she noticed the plain tuxedo and assumed what so many would. "Can you bring me a fresh napkin, please? These ones are damp," she added, holding one out as if it were contaminated. Keanu took it, nodded once, and said gently, "Of course." But he didn't turn back toward the kitchen. He kept moving forward. Moments later, a man in a shiny blue jacket stepped into his path. He wore diamond cufflinks and a frown. "My wife's waiting on that champagne," he barked, gesturing toward a nearby table. "Don't just wander. We paid for full service tonight." Keanu glanced at the man's wife, who avoided eye contact and looked mildly embarrassed. Without changing expression, Keanu offered a calm, "I'll pass that along." Then he continued past them both, his steps still steady, his tray untouched. It happened again and again. A donor who snapped her fingers when she wanted to be seen, a young executive who demanded extra ice, a couple who didn't even speak to him, just waved him away, like he was invisible when he wasn't useful to them. Through it all, Keanu's posture never changed. His face remained soft, his hands steady. He didn't take offense. He didn't explain himself. Because he hadn't come to be known. He'd come to serve a different audience, and that audience was watching him from across the room. Her name was Maya, and she had already noticed something the others had missed. From her seat near the front of the ballroom, Maya watched the man in the tuxedo weave through the tables. Something about him didn't match the rhythm of the room. The other waiters rushed, dodged elbows, whispered updates into earpieces, but this one moved like he had all the time in the world. Like he wasn't there to deliver drinks, but to notice things. She tilted her head slightly. He wasn't smiling for tips or praise. He smiled only when someone looked him in the eye, and even then it was small, real, almost private. She watched as he passed by a woman who pointed impatiently to her empty wine glass, not even thanking him when he paused. She watched as he stepped aside so a volunteer could pass with a wheelchair, gently adjusting his tray so not a single glass wobbled. His hands were steady. That's what struck her first. She leaned toward her nurse. "That waiter," she whispered. "He doesn't look like the others." Layla glanced up. "How so?" Maya didn't answer right away. She kept watching him. His back was to her now. He had stopped to speak quietly to one of the children a few rows behind her. Tommy, who was in a bright green wheelchair with a plastic toy spaceship attached to it. Maya could see Tommy's eyes light up as the man knelt down and said something to him. Then, slowly, he moved on. Layla followed Maya's gaze, observing. He does seem slower. No, Maya whispered. He seems gentle. She turned her attention back to her lap, where her small hands tugged at the edge of her beanie. His hands aren't like the others. They're not tired, not rushed. A few minutes passed before he finally approached her section. He made his way toward her row, offering cider to a young girl in a hospital bed before stopping in front of Maya. Their eyes met. He didn't ask if she wanted anything. He didn't treat her like a child or a patient. He just looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. "Would you like a glass?" he asked softly. Maya nodded. He reached forward and held the glass out, not overhanded, not rushed, but carefully, like he was offering her something rare. She accepted it with both hands and took a moment to feel the coolness against her fingers. Then, without thinking, she said the words that had been forming quietly in her mind. "You don't seem like the others." He raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't ask what she meant. He just smiled, and in that smile, Maya felt something shift. He knew, and he didn't need her to explain. Maya sipped her cider slowly, the bubbles tickling her nose as she looked at the man still crouched beside her chair. She could feel the way the room moved around them. Waiters weaving through tables, clinks of silverware, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the back. But none of it touched this moment. It was like everything else had gone quiet, just for them. She studied his face more closely now. There were faint lines around his eyes, but not the kind that came from frowning, the kind that come from paying attention. He wasn't polished the way some of the donors were. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but his presence didn't scream wealth or power. It whispered kindness. "Hey, Maya," she said after a long pause. His eyes softened. "That's a beautiful name." "Thanks," she replied. "My grandma says it means illusion, but I like to think it means space. Because that's where my dreams are." He nodded slowly, as if the meaning behind her name mattered more than what it technically meant. "You like space?" she asked. "Very much. What's your favorite planet?" He thought for a second. "I think Saturn, for the rings." "I like Mars," Maya said, her voice more sure now. "It's red and full of secrets." He smiled again. "Then you must be a brave explorer." Her cheeks flushed. No one had ever called her that before. Brave? Maybe when she got blood tests without crying. But explorer? That was new. And somehow it felt more real than any compliment she'd been given in months. She looked down at his hands as he rested them gently on his knees. "You don't have dishwater hands," she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. "Dishwater hands?" Maya nodded. "Most of the waiters at the hospital cafeteria have hands that are dry and cracked from the hot water. Yours are soft. And your nails aren't chipped. You're not really a waiter, are you?" He tilted his head. "What makes you think that?" "Because you're listening to me like my words matter," she said. "Most grown-ups just nod and move on." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. Instead, he said, "I think your words matter more than most people's." Maya's chest fluttered, not from nerves, from being understood. He looked around briefly and lowered his voice. "You know, sometimes people put on uniforms so they can disappear." "Why would anyone want to disappear?" Maya asked. "To be present without being seen," he said, "so they can watch the right things, the important things." Maya smiled. "Like kids who love space?" He nodded, exactly. In the distance, the host's voice rang out again, preparing to announce something on the microphone. But in that moment, Maya already knew something big was happening. She just didn't know yet that the man beside her was about to change her life. Maya looked at the man sitting beside her and then at the tray resting gently on the ground near his knee. He hadn't moved in minutes. The glasses of cider shimmered in the soft light, but he no longer offered them. Instead, he was watching her with quiet attention, the kind that made her feel less like a sick child and more like someone important. She took a small sip from her glass, wiped her lips with the back of her hand, and looked up at him again. "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to stand on another planet?" she asked. He smiled. "Every day." Maya leaned forward. "Which one would you pick?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the chandelier for a moment, like it reminded him of a frozen star. "That depends," he said. "Do you want mystery or beauty?" She raised her eyebrows. "Can't I have both?" He chuckled softly. "Then I'd pick Saturn. It has rings made of ice and dust, like space jewelry." Maya smiled wide. "Good choice, but I still think I'd go with Mars." He nodded slowly. "Because of the volcanoes? And because it's lonely?" she said. "I think Mars is waiting for someone. Like, maybe it's been waiting a long time for people to come and wake it up." Keanu blinked, moved by the thought. "That's a beautiful way to put it." "I want to be one of those people," she said. "I believe you will be." She hesitated, almost not wanting to ask what came next. But curiosity lived deep inside her, louder than fear. "Even though I'm sick?" Keanu turned fully toward her now, giving her the kind of focus adults rarely offered. "Especially because you're sick," he said. "You're already stronger than most people I've ever met. You've been to places in your mind that some never get to visit." Maya's cheeks flushed. She looked down at her lap, twisting her fingers together, and then back up at him. "What do you do?" she asked. "Not what your job is, but what do you really do?" He tilted his head, a thoughtful smile touching his face. "I listen to people's stories." "Like mine?" "Yes," he said softly. "Like yours." That answer seemed to satisfy her, but she wasn't done. "You don't talk like a waiter," she said again, "and your eyes don't move around the room like you're trying to keep track of plates. You stay with people." He smiled. "You notice a lot." "I have time to," she said, shrugging slightly. "When you spend months in a hospital, you get really good at watching. People forget you're listening." "I won't forget," he said. And he meant it. Maya could tell. There was something solid in his voice. No pity, no pretending. His truth. Maya leaned forward in her chair, her elbows resting on the armrests, her cider glass now balanced carefully in her lap. "So, do you believe in aliens?" she asked, her voice serious. Keanu's eyes crinkled slightly as he considered her question. "I believe the universe is too big for us to be alone," he said. "And I think whatever is out there probably looks at us the same way you look at the stars. Curious, wondering." Maya giggled. "Do you think they'd like us?" "That depends," he said, "on whether we choose to be kind." Her face softened at that. Then she glanced sideways as Tommy rolled over in his green wheelchair, drawn by the sound of their conversation. "What are you guys talking about?" Tommy asked, clutching his toy rocket. "Aliens," Maya answered. "And how Saturn is space jewelry." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Saturn's my favorite too, but did you know Neptune has storms bigger than Earth?" Keanu nodded. "The Great Dark Spot. It's like Jupiter's red storm, but colder. And deeper." Tommy's jaw dropped. "You really know this stuff?" Now, other children nearby began to inch closer, their wheelchairs rolling softly over the carpet. Sarah, a shy 10-year-old recovering from heart surgery, clutched a coloring book filled with galaxies and planets. She looked up hesitantly. "Do you know anything about black holes?" she asked quietly. Keanu looked at her and smiled. "A few things. What do you want to know?" She bit her lip. "Are they really like vacuum cleaners?" He chuckled gently. "A little. But they're more like doorways. We don't know where they lead. They pull everything in, even light. And what happens after, no one's sure yet." Sarah blinked. "So it's like a mystery? The biggest one in the universe?" The group of children leaned in together. The ballroom around them, filled with adults clinking champagne glasses and discussing real estate, seemed to fade. This pocket of space, This cluster of kids and one kneeling man in a tuxedo became its own galaxy. Keanu sat cross-legged now, eye level with all of them, his tray completely forgotten behind him. His voice was calm, patient, and steady. He didn't simplify anything, didn't water it down. He spoke to them the way real explorers speak to other explorers. He told them about Voyager, still flying out into the stars with music from Earth. He told them how astronauts sleep, strapped into bunks, so they don't float away. He described the stillness of space, how quiet it must be, and the feeling of seeing Earth from orbit, how it makes people cry. Maya listened with wide eyes. She looked again at his hands resting on his knees. They weren't waiter's hands, they were someone's hands. Someone who remembered what it was like to wonder. "Are you an artist?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. He looked at her and smiled again. But this time, he didn't answer. Maya held her breath, waiting for him to answer her question. "Are you an artist?" Keanu smiled gently but said nothing. Instead, he looked around at the children sitting in a quiet circle around him, their eyes wide, their faces filled with wonder. The kind of wonder that didn't need answers, just presence. Tommy piped up, holding out his toy rocket. "Do you think real rockets are louder than this one?" Keanu nodded. "A lot louder, like thunder but closer. You feel it in your chest." The children gasped. "What about gravity?" Sarah asked. "Is floating really fun?" "It takes getting used to," he said, "but yes. It's like learning to swim without water." The kids laughed. Maya did too. Her eyes never left him. She watched the way he talked. He didn't rush. He didn't look away. He didn't speak to them like they were patients or kids who needed cheering up. He spoke to them like they were fellow explorers, dreamers. She looked down at her hands, still holding the napkin rocket he'd folded for her. "If you're not a waiter," she said softly, "then why are you here?" Keanu's eyes returned to hers. "Because sometimes," he said, "you have to disappear to really see." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. It felt true. He didn't need to explain. In that moment, Maya decided something quietly inside herself. Whoever this man was, whatever he was, he saw her. Not her illness, not her chair, not her chart. Her. And that, more than any galaxy, made her feel infinite. At table 6, Clarissa Langston narrowed her eyes at her champagne glass. She held the stem up to the light as if inspecting a diamond, then raised one perfectly manicured eyebrow. "This is warm," she snapped. The man beside her, Gregory Flint, real estate mogul and a guest she only barely tolerated, chuckled behind his napkin. "I'm sure they're doing their best, Clarissa." "I didn't donate $10,000 for doing their best," she said coldly. "This is a $1 million event. I expect excellence." The performer bowed. She looked around the ballroom with annoyance, her gaze sweeping past photographers, servers, and the carefully dressed host near the podium. Then her eyes landed on the tall man in the black tuxedo, kneeling beside the children at the front. "That one," she said sharply, pointing. "He ignored me." Gregory glanced over. "You mean the server?" "I asked him, twice, for a cold glass of champagne and he walked right past me like I wasn't speaking," she said, her voice rising. "Unacceptable." "Well," Gregory said carefully, "he's not exactly working this side of the room anymore." Clarissa pushed back her chair with a loud scrape and stood, smoothing her silver dress. "Then I'll take it to the top." She marched across the ballroom, drawing eyes with each angry step. Guests turned their heads as she approached James Avery, who stood near the silent auction table, speaking to a local newscaster. "Mr. Avery," she said, interrupting, "I'd like a word." He turned quickly, surprised by her tone. "Mrs. Langston, is something wrong?" "Yes," she said. "Your staff, one of them specifically. That waiter with the dark hair. He ignored my request. Completely ignored me, twice." James blinked. "Which waiter?" She pointed. "That one, over there, with the children." James followed her finger, His eyes landed on the back of a tuxedo. Keanu was kneeling beside Maya again, showing the kids how to fold a paper towel into a tiny space helmet. They were laughing quietly, a small circle of joy glowing against the backdrop of crystal and complaints. James kept his face neutral. "I see. I want him dismissed," Clarissa said. "Immediately. I didn't donate to be treated like furniture." Nearby, other donors began to gather, drawn by the raised voice. "Who's being dismissed?" asked a man in a red tie. "Apparently a server's causing issues," Clarissa answered loudly. "Oh, I saw him too," another woman chimed in. "Took a drink to the wrong table. Very unprofessional." A third guest crossed his arms. "This is what happens when they let amateurs volunteer. It ruins the atmosphere." James looked from one face to the next, carefully keeping his composure. His pulse quickened. "I'll look into it," he said. "Please, enjoy the program. Dinner is being served shortly." Clarissa huffed and returned to her table, but not before casting one last glare toward the front of the room. Keanu hadn't looked back once. He had heard everything, but he didn't flinch. Maya had noticed the change in the room. It started with a shift in the air, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful but tense. A few heads turned toward the back of the ballroom. The polite hum of conversation slowed. Forks hovered in mid-air. People leaned toward one another, whispering behind their hands. Even the music, which had been playing softly in the background, seemed to fade. She looked at Keanu, who was still seated cross-legged on the floor beside her and the other children. He hadn't moved. His voice remained soft as he answered Tommy's question about how long it would take to get to Neptune. "About 12 years with current technology," he said. "That's a lot of time to float." Tommy's eyes grew round. 12 years? That's older than my brother. Keanu smiled. But Maya could see it, the way his shoulders were just a little tighter, how his eyes flicked for just a second toward the far side of the room. He had heard the voices rising. He had heard Clarissa Langston's sharp demands. He had heard the words, "Fire him," echo, just loud enough for the nearby tables to pause. Still, he didn't get up. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He simply turned his attention back to Sarah, who was holding a drawing of a spaceship with rings like Saturn. "Did you design this?" he asked. She nodded shyly. "It's beautiful," he said. "I would fly this ship." Her face lit up, but Maya wasn't smiling. Her eyes were scanning the crowd. Clarissa was pointing again, this time at James Avery, who was trying to calm her while more guests leaned in. A woman in a gold shawl shook her head in disapproval. A man with a silver tie muttered something to his wife. "I think people are mad," Maya whispered. Keanu looked at her. "Why do you say that?" "Damn, I keep pointing," she said, gesturing subtly. "At you." He turned toward her, not the crowd. "What do you think I should do?" Maya thought for a second. "I think you should stay." He nodded. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." At another table, a guest had now stood up. "We're trying to enjoy dinner," he announced in an annoyed voice. "And some of us have been waiting 20 minutes for wine." "It's outrageous," Clarissa added, her tone sharp. "This is $1 million gala, not a picnic." People began murmuring. Servers moved faster now, their trays quivering. Volunteers exchanged nervous glances. The MC stepped back from the microphone, unsure whether to proceed with the program or address the tension in the room. And yet, through all of it, Keanu remained where he was. Not because he hadn't heard, but because he had chosen where he needed to be. And he wasn't leaving. Not yet. The noise in the ballroom grew louder. Whispers became voices. Voices turned sharp. Somewhere near the back, a chair scraped loudly against the floor as another guest stood, arms crossed, expression tight. Maya could feel it. The tension pressed against her skin like heat. She looked up at Keanu, still seated calmly beside her. He hadn't moved, hadn't defended himself, hadn't even looked back. But she saw the way he exhaled through his nose. quietly, slowly. He'd heard every word. "They think you're doing something wrong," Maya said. "I know," he replied softly. He shook his head. "No." Maya's hands tightened around her cup. "Then why don't you tell them?" He looked at her with those still, steady eyes. "Because I didn't come here to explain myself." She watched him for a moment, trying to understand the kind of strength it took to stay still when people were shouting around you. Behind them, Mrs. Langston waved her arm again. "This is absolutely disgraceful." But Keanu didn't flinch. He simply turned back to Maya and asked, "What's the first thing you'd do if you landed on Mars?" She blinked, startled by the question, then smiled. "I'd plant a flag. One that says, 'Kids dream here.'" Keanu smiled. "That's the best mission I've heard all night." A volunteer crouched beside Maya, clearly nervous. "Sweetie, there's a bit of confusion about, well, him," she said gently. "People are upset." Maya looked at Keanu, then back at the volunteer. "He's not the problem," she said clearly. "They are." The volunteer hesitated, then nodded. And slowly, the children leaned in closer to Keanu, not away from him. While the grown-ups grew louder behind them, this small circle of explorers grew quieter, stronger. They knew where they belonged. Right there, with him, the host stepped up to the podium with a confident smile. He adjusted the microphone, waiting for the final murmurs of clinking glasses and shuffling heels to fade. The gala had flowed like clockwork, each speaker more polished than the last, each sponsor more loudly applauded. But this moment wasn't on the schedule. "Before we continue with our next presentation," the host began, pausing as a subtle grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, "I'd like to take a moment to thank someone." The room shifted. A few attendees looked at one another, confused by the unexpected interruption. Clarissa Langston lowered her wine glass with a faint clink, slightly annoyed by the break in rhythm. She wasn't one to enjoy surprises that didn't involve gifts or cameras. The host looked out at the audience, then gestured toward the far left of the ballroom. A single spotlight flicked on. It landed on a man still kneeling beside a small child. Gasps rose. Maya clutched the folded napkin Keanu had given her and turned slowly as light bathed them both. The host smiled wider. "Most of you didn't recognize him tonight. He's been quietly refilling your glasses, cleaning up spilled juice, and helping your children find their seats." A few people squinted. One man leaned forward. The host's voice lifted, warm and proud. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't need applause. "But you should all know, this evening, your children were looked after by none other than Mr. Keanu Reeves." A heartbeat of stunned silence. Then chaos. Dozens of heads turned. Phones shot into the air like startled birds. Camera flashes ignited. Clarissa Langston's jaw dropped so hard it nearly collided with her necklace. She gripped the back of her chair for balance, blinking furiously. Maya looked up at Keanu, her voice small. "You're famous." Keanu gave her a quiet smile. "Sometimes. But tonight, I just wanted to help." Whispers filled the ballroom like wind rustling through trees. "That's Keanu Reeves? Wasn't he pouring water earlier? I thought he looked familiar." The host motioned for Keanu to join him on stage. "Mr. Reeves, would you mind coming up here?" Keanu stood slowly, brushing off his knees. The spotlight followed as he took Maya's hand and helped her to her feet. She didn't let go. As they walked together toward the stage, the sea of elite donors and executives parted like a tide. People who had dismissed him, scolded him, or ignored him now stared with wide eyes and open mouths. He passed Clarissa Langston without looking her way, but the color drained from her face. She sank into her chair, frozen in silent horror. Keanu reached the stage. He lifted Maya onto the platform first, then climbed up behind her. He turned to the crowd, who were still struggling to piece together what had just happened. And then, calmly, he nodded to the host. The whole stepped aside and gestured for Keanu to take the microphone. The room was still buzzing, some people standing in disbelief, others trying to open their camera apps fast enough to catch a glimpse. Keanu looked over the crowd, his face relaxed, humble, without a trace of the self-satisfaction the elite guests were so used to seeing in this room. He leaned into the mic with a quiet voice that carried, "I came here tonight because this event is supposed to be about children. Not status, not fashion, not recognition. Just kids, and the lives we say we want to change." He glanced down at Maya, who stood beside him barefoot, still holding her napkin like a treasure. "I met Maya about an hour ago," he continued. "She was alone, frightened, and ignored. Her dress was stained with juice, her shoes were lost under a table, and her tears were real. Nobody noticed, because she wasn't holding a checkbook or wearing diamonds." The silence was now absolute. Keanu let the moment breathe. He scanned the front tables where Clarissa Langston sat, pale and still. Across from her, a tech mogul who had barked at Keanu earlier lowered his head. The woman who had demanded a second napkin refill visibly winced. "We say this is a charity gala," Keanu said, softly. "But charity without compassion is just theater." The air seemed to leave the room. Maya looked up at him, her eyes shining. She didn't fully understand the moment, but she felt something shift. So did everyone else. Keanu looked out at the audience again, his eyes soft but unflinching. "You all looked past me tonight, which is fine. I didn't come for you. But you also looked past her." He pointed gently at Maya. "And that's the part I want us all to think about." The host cleared his throat quietly but didn't interrupt. Even he hadn't expected the depth of Keanu's words. He had planned a quick reveal and a laugh. Not this, mirror held up to the entire room. Keanu placed the microphone back on its stand. He crouched down beside Maya, whispered something that made her nod, and then took her hand again. The crowd didn't applaud. They didn't know how. They weren't sure if clapping would honor the moment or insult it. Maya smiled and waved at the room with the confidence only a child can summon. A few guests managed a weak smile back. Then came a sound, slow and solitary. A single clap from the back of the room. It echoed. Another joined in, then another, until finally the entire room erupted into applause. It wasn't loud, it wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. Hesitant, acknowledging, not of fame, but of truth. Keanu bowed his head slightly in gratitude. Then, with Maya still by his side, he stepped away from the microphone and began walking down the stairs from the stage. As Keanu and Maya stepped off the stage, the applause faded into a hush again. No one quite knew how to return to normal. Waiters stood still. Guests remained seated, some blinking as if they'd just woken from a long, glittering dream. Keanu walked slowly beside Maya, not toward the VIP tables, but back to the small row of seats near the children's area. He didn't look left or right. Maya held his hand tightly, her napkin crumpled in the other, and beamed with pride. People whispered, not with gossip now, but with reverence. A senator leaned to his wife and murmured, "That wasn't a speech, that was a mirror." Clarissa Langston slumped in her chair. She watched Keanu pass without meeting her eyes. Her phone buzzed again. A video clip of her barking at Keanu had already made it to social media, racking up likes with captions like, "Millionaire socialite yells at Keanu Reeves, watch what happens next." The sting was public, but the real burn came from Maya's question echoing in her head. Why didn't anyone help me? At the kids section, Maya climbed into her seat and looked up. "Can I still call you Mr. K?" she asked. Keanu smiled. "I hope you do." She giggled and tucked the napkin safely into her dress pocket. Around them, parents quietly walked toward their children. Some bent down to listen. Some offered hugs they hadn't thought to give before. Across the room, a powerful businessman picked up a juice box and handed it to a child without a word. A woman in pearls helped a little boy tie his shoelaces. The smallest gestures suddenly mattered. Smell recalls, Gideon back on stage, the host fumbled to resume. Well, that certainly wasn't on the itinerary. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. No one laughed. The next speaker's name was read, but only a few clapped. The magic had already happened. The story had already been told. And at the center of it sat a man in a wrinkled tuxedo and a barefoot little girl who felt, finally, like someone had seen her. Maya looked at him once more. "Where did you help me?" she whispered. Keanu leaned in. "Because someone should have." And then, softly, "And because you're important." In that moment, the whole room finally understood what the evening was meant to be about. Keanu stood still for a moment after returning to his seat beside Maya. But something in the room hadn't settled. The host was still fumbling his transition, trying to introduce the next speaker, but the crowd wasn't listening. Heads kept turning back to Keanu, eyes lingering on him, as if waiting for one more moment of clarity. The host hesitated, then leaned into the microphone again. "Mr. Reeves," he said gently, "if you have anything else you'd like to say, the stage is yours." Keanu looked down at Maya, who gave him an encouraging nod. Without a word, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked calmly toward the podium again. This time, he didn't need a spotlight to announce his presence. Every eye followed him. He reached the microphone, placed both hands on the sides of the podium, and took a breath. "I didn't come here to be honored," he began. "I came to serve." His voice was calm but firm, steady, unapologetic. "I didn't know if I was even going to attend tonight. I've always struggled with events like this. Big rooms, formal wear, applause for things that haven't happened yet. But someone very dear to me once told me that if you're uncomfortable somewhere, that might be where you're needed most." A few heads nodded. Keanu glanced around. "So I showed up, quietly, without a name tag. I didn't plan to serve drinks. I just saw someone spill a cup and no one moved, so I did." He smiled faintly, and then another, and then another. A few chuckles emerged, but they were soft, respectful. Keanu's tone shifted. When Maya walked in, crying and alone, I thought of my own childhood. There were nights my sister Kim and I would sit outside on the fire escape in Toronto just to breathe fresh air and feel the stars. We were kids trying to feel safe in a world that didn't always make space for quiet people. His words landed slowly, like stones dropping into water. Kim had this light in her, even when she got sick, especially then. She taught me something I carry every day, that gentleness is not weakness. He paused, eyes flicking across the crowd. When you grow up watching someone fight with grace, you realize that strength doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like kindness, like holding someone's hand when they're scared, like picking up a napkin for a child instead of waiting for someone else to do it. He nodded toward Maya, who was staring at him with wide, steady eyes. She reminded me of what I'd buried, the quietness, the stillness, the part of me that didn't need to perform to be present. The room was utterly still now. Not a glass clinked, not a phone buzzed. Even the staff had stopped in the wings to listen. Keanu looked back at Maya, then out again. "Being mistaken for a waiter," he said slowly, "is not an insult. It's a reminder of what matters." A few people in the crowd looked down, uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, visibly moved. Clarissa Langston had stopped blinking. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the shine on her bracelet dulled by the weight of shame pressing down on her. Keanu continued, his voice steady. "We live in a world that rewards visibility. The louder you are, the more attention you get. But I've learned the most powerful moments happen when no one is watching, when you think no one will ever know. That's when your character speaks the loudest." He scanned the room, his gaze landing on no one and everyone at once. I've played a lot of roles in my life, heroes, assassins, outsiders, but none of that really matters. What matters is how we treat people when there's nothing to gain, when we think no one will remember our name, when it's just us and a stranger who needs something. Keanu looked toward the table where Maya sat, now surrounded by other children who suddenly treated her like a star. He was the only one who looked at me with kindness tonight. No expectation, no judgment, just trust. A wave of murmurs moved through the audience like wind through trees. Keanu returned his gaze to the crowd. And that's what I want to honor tonight. Not me. Maya. He paused. He's the reason I stood up, the reason I stayed, the reason I remembered why I used to love showing up to these kinds of things in the first place. A man in the second row wiped the corner of his eye discreetly. Children don't need us to teach them who to become, Keanu said softly. Most of the time, they remind us who we were. The host stepped back further, sensing the speech wasn't just unexpected, it was historic. I don't need an award. I don't need recognition. What I need is for all of us to go home tonight, asking ourselves one question. He held the silence for a beat. Did I see the people I was supposed to see? The lights felt warmer now, softer. Something had shifted, not just in the atmosphere, but in the hearts of those who had come for wine and influence. Now, they sat humbled by a man in a tuxedo who had handed out napkins instead of business cards. I almost left tonight, Keanu admitted. But I stayed, because of one little girl, and I realized I was never the guest of honor. I was the one being taught. Clarissa couldn't stop the tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks and landed in her lap. She didn't wipe them away. She just stared at the man she'd ridiculed, now standing with more dignity than any executive or donor in the room. Keanu looked up once more. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is kneel beside someone else's pain. Keanu stepped away from the podium slowly, not in triumph, but in peace. There was no dramatic bow, no sweeping farewell. Just a man returning to his seat, having spoken what needed to be said. The crowd didn't erupt into applause this time. They sat still, absorbing every word. A few quietly placed their phones face down on the table. Others looked at their own children in the room and blinked harder than before. As he passed the host, the man whispered, "That was one of the most honest things I've ever heard in this ballroom." Keanu simply nodded and continued on. At her table, Clarissa Langston couldn't lift her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she folded her napkin and set it on her untouched dessert plate. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled under the chandelier, but she felt smaller than she had in years. Her perfectly styled hair, her designer dress, it all felt like a costume now. Across the room, Maya sat with her chin in her hands, gazing at Keanu like he was the only adult she trusted. As he returned to her table, she stood up and reached out. "You talked about me," she said softly. Keanu knelt again, back at eye level. "I did. You reminded me who I used to be." Maya reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the folded napkin he had given her earlier. "I want you to have it back," she said. He shook his head. "No, that's yours." "But you helped me," she insisted. He looked at her gently. "Then you keep it. And one day, when someone else needs help, you'll remember how you felt right now." Maya smiled and sat back down, holding the napkin like it was sacred. The moment echoed louder than applause. People at nearby tables stood slowly and walked to the children's area, offering to sit beside the younger guests, listening to them for the first time all night. A chef in the back took off his hat and watched with watery eyes. Even the servers who had earlier been told to ignore the unimportant guests now looked inspired. One picked up an extra tray of desserts and quietly brought them over to the kids section, offering them like gifts rather than duties. The host returned to the mic, his voice shaky. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, We still have a program to finish, but something tells me tonight's most important speech has already been given." A few guests clapped softly, but most simply stood and watched Keanu sit back down. No spotlight followed him now, but no one looked away. What lingered wasn't celebrity or charity. It was grace. And for the first time in that glittering ballroom, it didn't come from the chandeliers above, but from the space between one man's quiet courage and one child's innocent need. The ballroom slowly returned to motion, but Keanu quietly slipped away through the side door, with Maya's nurse and the hospital director close behind. Away from the cameras and murmurs, the hallway was silent except for the low hum of the overhead lights. The hospital director, a woman in her late 60s named Dr. Helen Klein, turned to him once they reached the service corridor. "I have to ask," she said gently, "why did you really come tonight?" Keanu looked at her with calm eyes. "Because of Maya." The nurse, a young woman named Erin, blinked in surprise. "You mean you came for her? Not the gala?" Keanu nodded. "I heard about her a few months ago, through a friend who volunteers at your hospital. They told me about a little girl who draws pictures of Mars on her IV bags, who teaches other kids about gravity to distract them from pain, who refused to cry after her last surgery because she didn't want the other kids to feel afraid." Dr. Klein swallowed hard. "That's Maya. I saw myself in her," Keanu said quietly. "Not because of the science stuff, because of the stubborn hope." He looked down the hallway, his voice softer now. "When I was a kid, I didn't have much stability. My mom worked late, we moved a lot, and I had a hard time finding a place where I fit. But I had my sister, and I had stories. Books, space, possibility." He turned back to them. "Maya reminded me of that. I wanted to meet her quietly. No red carpet, no stage. Just truth." The nurse wiped her eyes. "She thought she was invisible when she walked in." Keanu nodded. "I know. That's why I stayed at her table." Dr. Klein placed a hand over her heart. "You have no idea what this will do for her." "I do," he said, "because someone once saw me when I felt invisible too." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Keanu asked softly, "Do you mind if I talk to her again?" Erin smiled. "She hasn't stopped talking about you." Dr. Klein stepped aside, allowing him to return through the staff hallway entrance back into the ballroom. This time, not for the crowd. This time, for Maya alone. Keanu stepped through the side hallway, unnoticed by the room still captivated by the afterglow of his speech. He returned quietly to the children's area where Maya was seated, legs swinging beneath her chair. She saw him and lit up instantly, waving as if he were an old friend returning from an adventure. He knelt beside her again, this time without the weight of a spotlight or the tension of a crowd. Just two people, eye to eye. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I wouldn't disappear," he replied with a gentle smile. "And I have something to ask you." She tilted her head. "Me?" He nodded. "Yes, you." She sat straighter. "You told me you want to go to Mars," he said. "That you like to build things, to dream big." She smiled shyly and nodded. "I want to make rockets and helmets that don't fog up. And I want to float." Keanu grinned. "I believe you will." She looked at him with wonder. "But here's my question," he said. "Would you help me build something for other kids who dream of the stars?" Her eyes widened. "Like what?" "Like a place," he said, "where kids like you can learn about space and design things and see that their ideas matter. A place where no one gets ignored." Maya's bottom lip trembled slightly. "Like a real thing, not pretend?" "A real thing," he said. "Something we'll create together." She blinked fast, tears threatening to spill. "Even if I'm still sick?" "Especially then," Keanu said, "because courage isn't about waiting until you feel better. It's about believing your dreams still matter while you're healing." Maya looked down at her hands, then back at him. Can it have stars on the ceiling? Stars that glow, he said, and gravity swings, and telescopes, and a wall where your Mars designs can go first. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it quickly and whispered, "Yes." Keanu reached out and gently took her hand. "Then it begins tonight." She nodded. From across the room, Aaron and Dr. Klein stood watching, their eyes misty. What was being built wasn't just for Maya. It was something much larger, something Keanu had carried silently in his heart. And now, he was passing it to her. Keanu sat beside Maya now, no longer a guest of honor, no longer a surprise, just a partner in her dream. Around them, the buzz of the gala continued in softened waves. Waiters resumed their duties. The host tried to steer the event back on course. But at that small corner table, time felt different. "I've already started planning some ideas," Keanu said gently. "A location, a few friends who want to help, engineers, artists, people who believe imagination heals." Maya nodded, hanging on every word. "Will it have moon rocks?" Keanu chuckled. "If you help me design the display, we'll find a way." She sat quietly for a moment, then said, "I always feel better when I'm imagining space things. Like the pain goes quiet. That's why this place matters," Keanu replied. "Because when you feel safe to imagine, you start believing again." She looked at him carefully. "Were you ever scared like me?" He nodded slowly. "I was scared a lot. I just didn't know how to say it. But I learned something. Fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're still trying." Maya's eyes shimmered. "I want other kids to know that too." "They will," he said, "because you'll help teach them." Aaron approached quietly, crouching beside them. "We'll support whatever this becomes," she said, "and I'll make sure Maya keeps drawing those blueprints." Maya lit up. "I have one of a space ladder." "I want to see it," Keanu said. He stood, then leaned close to Maya again. "Tonight was supposed to be about charity, but you reminded me it's about vision." She smiled through tears. "You made me feel big again." "You were never small," he said softly. "They just didn't look closely enough." "Ugh." Dr. Klein joined them now, holding a quiet reverence in her voice. "You've done something I've never seen, Mr. Reeves. You've turned a gala into a beginning." Keanu didn't take credit. He looked at Maya. Sheen did. And with that, the next chapter began. Not with a grand announcement, not with headlines, but with a child holding a napkin and a man who remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Together, they had started something only belief could finish. After Keanu's quiet conversation with Maya ended, something unexpected happened. She stood up from her chair, tugging gently on his sleeve. He looked down, and she whispered, "Can I say something too?" He blinked, surprised. "To who?" She pointed toward the stage, to them. Keanu paused, then gave her a small nod. "If you feel ready." Maya turned to Aaron and Dr. Klein, who were both watching closely. They exchanged a look, then motioned for the host. Within seconds, the microphone was back in its stand, but this time, the height was lowered. Maya walked carefully toward the stage with Keanu at her side. Her bare feet touched the red carpet as guests turned in their chairs again, unsure of what was about to happen. A hush fell once more, but this silence felt different. It was filled with curiosity and awe. Maya climbed the steps with Keanu's help and took her place at the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces. Her voice trembled, slightly at first. "My name is Maya," she said. "I'm 9, and I want to go to Mars one day." A few soft chuckles rippled through the room, warm and gentle. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "But I didn't want to talk about that. I wanted to say something about my mom." The room went still again. "My mom cleans houses for a living. She comes home tired. Her hands are rough because of the chemicals she uses. Sometimes I hold her hand and it feels like sandpaper." She paused, swallowing a lump in her throat. "But her love is soft. Her love is stronger than anything. Even when we didn't have enough for my medicine, she found a way. Even when I was scared, she smiled like nothing was wrong." The audience sat frozen. Tears glistened in more than one pair of eyes. "She brought me here tonight because she thought maybe someone would notice me. But I think God wanted me to notice all of you." A few people covered their mouths, stunned by the depth in her small voice. "Please," she said, looking out over the crowd, "don't judge people by how they look, or what they wear, or if their hands are clean." She held up her tiny fingers. "Sometimes love looks like work, and sometimes heroes look tired." Maya's words hung in the air like lanterns. No one moved. Her voice, soft and shaking but filled with conviction, had pierced through walls thicker than money or pride. She looked across the room and locked eyes with someone near the center table. It was Clarissa Langston. Maya didn't know her name, didn't know the stories whispered about her, but Clarissa felt it anyway. The little girl's gaze held no blame, only quiet truth. Clarissa lowered her head. "I used to think people didn't see me because I was small," Maya continued. "But sometimes I think they don't see anyone who looks like my mom, who cleans, or cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep." She took a breath, the crowd now holding theirs. "If you're rich, or important, or on TV, maybe people think you're more real. But I think being real means you see other people before they see you." A single clap sounded from the back of the room, then another. But Maya kept going. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "I want to be kind. I want to remember how it feels to be invisible, so I never forget to look for someone else who is." Now the applause grew louder, not chaotic, but rising like a tide of humility and admiration. Maya turned to Keanu, who stood nearby with a hand gently resting over his heart. "Saw me," she said, pointing at him. "He didn't have to. But he did." She faced the audience again. "You can do that too." The crowd began to rise to their feet one by one like flowers turning toward the light. Donors, politicians, journalists, chefs, waitstaff. It didn't matter what their roles had been at the beginning of the night. By now they were just people, changed by a child who spoke like a whisper but hit like thunder. When Maya stepped back from the microphone, the ovation washed over her. But she didn't smile for the applause. She smiled because she knew someone out there was hearing what they needed to hear. Keanu walked up the stairs and took her hand again. "You did more than speak," he whispered. "You reached them," she whispered back. It felt like telling the truth. As Maya and Keanu stepped off the stage, the standing ovation continued, but something about it was different from the applause earlier in the night. This wasn't for celebrity. It wasn't for show. It was for honesty, for courage, for a little girl who had told the truth without needing a script. Clarissa Langston remained standing, tears streaking her makeup. She clapped the longest. Her hands trembled, but her posture had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was owning the lesson. A man in a gray suit pulled out his phone, not to film, but to text his wife. All he wrote was, "We need to talk to Emma when I get home. I think I've been too distracted." Near the kitchen door, a server whispered to another, "She just said what I've wanted to say for years." Backstage, Dr. Klein wiped her eyes as she turned to Aaron. "We just watched something sacred," she said. Aaron nodded. And it wasn't even on the schedule. When Keanu and Maya returned to their table, the kids nearby surrounded her, asking questions, hugging her, calling her brave. One little boy said, "Can I help build the Mars place too?" Maya looked at Keanu. He smiled. "We'll need all the help we can get." The host, trying to regain composure at the podium, cleared his throat and addressed the room again. "I think we've heard tonight what real vision sounds like," he said. "Let this not be the end of a speech. Let it be the beginning of how we see." He turned toward the camera crew in the back. "If this footage is ever aired, I hope people hear Maya's words more than anything else." Then, addressing the audience one last time, "If you've ever been judged by your appearance or treated someone unfairly because of how they looked or sounded or dressed, or if you've made that mistake yourself, I invite you to reflect tonight." He paused. "And maybe tell your story." The spotlight dimmed as the host concluded, but the weight of his message lingered. Prompt to viewers: have you ever been judged by your appearance or treated someone differently by mistake? Tell us your story in the comments below. As the final applause faded, the room settled into an almost sacred stillness. It wasn't over, but no one wanted to break the atmosphere that had taken hours to build and seconds to shift. Then came an unexpected movement. Clarissa Langston rose from her table slowly. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she walked to the stage. No music accompanied her, no introduction. The spotlight hesitated, unsure if it should follow, but the audience turned toward her instinctively. Clarissa reached the microphone, glanced briefly at Keanu and Maya, then took a deep breath. For once, she didn't perform. She confessed. "I came here tonight as a benefactor," she said, her voice raw. "I wrote a check for $500,000. I thought that made me generous." The room stayed silent. "But I sat in this very room," she continued, "and looked past a child. I scolded a man I didn't recognize, assuming he was beneath me." She turned to face Keanu directly. "I owe you an apology. Not because you're famous, but because you were kind and I was not." Keanu nodded once. No words, just grace. Clarissa faced the crowd again. "I was going to present a gift to the hospital tonight, a gift with my name on it, but that's not the gift this place needs." She stepped back slightly from the mic, then turned to the hospital director, Dr. Klein, who was standing near the edge of the stage. "I'd like to cancel my previous donation," Clarissa said clearly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, raised eyebrows. "I'd like to increase it to $2 million. Gasps turned into stunned silence. "But only if it's used for something new," she added. "Something inspired by what happened here tonight." She glanced toward Maya. "I want to help fund the creation of what we'll call the Maya program." The room exhaled collectively. "It will begin with a scholarship fund for children in medical care who want to study science, art, or space. It will include learning pods placed in children's hospitals across the country, places where kids can explore and create even while they heal." She took another breath. "And it will include a new requirement for every donor here tonight. If you give money, you also give time." Clarissa let that final line hang in the air. Around the ballroom, no one protested, no one scoffed. Even the wealthiest guests, the ones used to cutting checks without lifting a finger, seemed struck by the simplicity of the demand. "Time," she repeated softly. "Not just for ribbon cuttings or photo apps, but real time. Sitting with the children we say we're helping, listening to them, learning their names, hearing their dreams." She turned toward Maya. "You gave me something tonight I didn't expect. You showed me what leadership looks like when there's no power behind it, just truth." Maya blinked rapidly, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her napkin again. Clarissa turned back to the crowd. "This is what the Maya program will stand for. Bravery in small bodies, dignity in overlooked faces, and education fueled by wonder." Dr. Klein stepped onto the stage, moved beyond words. She reached for the microphone. "Mrs. Langston, Clarissa," she said, her voice trembling, "what you've just done will impact children for generations. We accept your gift and your terms with our whole hearts." The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was no longer celebratory, it was reverent. Keanu watched from below the stage, arms crossed gently over his chest. A slight smile touched his face, but he made no move to interrupt. He had spoken enough. Now it was time for others to rise. Dr. Klein looked out at the audience. "And I'll add this," she said. "We'll be asking Mr. Reeves to advise the program, not as a spokesperson, but as a mentor. Someone who can help us build it with the same humility he's shown tonight." All eyes turned to Keanu. He nodded once, slow and steady. "I'd be honored." The crowd burst into applause again, not for celebrity, but for a man who had reminded them what service looked like. No spotlight, no headline, just presence, just willingness. At the back of the room, Erin, the nurse who had cared for Maya for over a year, wiped a tear and whispered to another staff member, "We just watched a hospital become a movement." And somehow, everyone in the room knew it was true. The Maya program wasn't just a concept anymore. It had started right then, in the open hearts of everyone watching. The host stepped forward again, but this time with none of his earlier polish. His voice was quiet, shaped by emotion instead of rehearsal. "We came here tonight expecting a fundraiser," he said, "but what we witnessed was a transformation." He looked at Clarissa, then at Maya, and finally at Keanu. "This room has seen celebrities and senators, royalty and rock stars, but I can't recall a moment when someone so small in stature made the biggest impact." He stepped aside from the mic and motioned gently toward Maya. The guests instinctively turned to her. She was seated again now, surrounded by the children she had unknowingly inspired, one of them holding her hand. Clarissa returned to her seat to a standing ovation. When she sat down, she didn't reach for her wine or straighten her hair. She turned to the woman beside her, a nurse she hadn't spoken to all evening, and said quietly, "I'd like to volunteer. Can you help me start?" The nurse nodded, stunned. "Yes, absolutely." The ripple had begun. In the following moments, hands were raised across the room, not for attention, but to offer help. A tech CEO whispered to his assistant, "Pull our donation paperwork. I want to match the Langston gift." A middle-aged actor leaned over to Keanu. "If you build it, I want to come teach there. I was a science geek before I ever hit a stage." Even the pastry chef who had worked in the back all evening asked if he could donate weekends to bake for the new learning pods. Something had cracked open inside the room, a kind of collective softening. Not showy, not performative, just real. Keanu looked toward Maya again. She caught his gaze and smiled, not like a child overwhelmed by praise, but like a child who had been seen and taken seriously. He walked over and knelt beside her one more time. "You've done more than most adults ever get the chance to do," he said. She nodded solemnly. "Can we still build the ceiling stars?" He grinned. "That's the first thing we'll do." And in that shared promise between a man once mistaken for a waiter and a girl once overlooked at the edge of a ballroom, the seeds of something far greater than charity had taken root. They had planted a culture, a future, and it had a name: the Maya program. As the evening moved toward its close, the crowd began to thin. Some guests took photos near the entrance, others signed donation forms in hushed voices. But Keanu wasn't near the cameras or the checkbooks. He sat with Maya again, this time in a quieter part of the room, just past the curtain that separated the main ballroom from the coat check. It was just the two of them now, seated on a small bench near a hallway lined with portraits of past hospital donors. The lights were dimmer here, softer, like the world had been turned down just enough for truth to step forward. Keanu looked at Maya, who was quietly sketching something on the back of a donation envelope. Her tongue peeked out from the corner of her mouth, a sign of focus. She was drawing a rocket again. He smiled, then took a deep breath. "Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone here tonight?" Maya looked up immediately and nodded. "You reminded me of someone," he said. "Someone I lost." Maya's eyes grew tender. She waited. "My daughter, Keanu said softly. Her name was Ava. She passed away before she even had a chance to live. She was stillborn. It was a long time ago. Maya didn't speak. She just listened. This gala, he continued, voice growing quieter, was scheduled for her due date. I didn't realize it until I was already on my way. I almost turned the car around. His hands folded together in his lap. I thought I'd never heal. Not really. There's a kind of silence that comes after losing someone who never got to speak. A stillness that follows you. Maya reached over and gently placed her hand on his. But tonight, he said, his throat tightening, you gave her a voice again. I heard her in your courage, in the way you stood up there, in your drawings, in your hope. A tear rolled slowly down his cheek. Maya whispered, maybe we were supposed to find each other. He looked at her and nodded. Maybe we were. She squeezed his hand and smiled, a little sad, a little bright. If Ava were here, I think she'd be my best friend. Keanu wiped his cheek with his sleeve, then whispered, you gave me back something I thought was gone forever. Maya sat quietly beside him, her hand still wrapped around his. The ballroom noise felt far away now, as if they'd stepped into a different world altogether, one where memories spoke louder than music, and silence carried its own language. Keanu looked down at her small fingers against his. I've never talked about Ava in public, he said. People know pieces, but not the whole. Maya nodded gently. Sometimes, when I'm hurting, I don't want people to see it either. He smiled faintly. You're braver than you know. She turned the envelope in her lap and began drawing again. Do you ever think about what she'd be like now? All the time, Keanu said. She'd be around your age. Maya paused and looked up. Do you think she'd like space too? He chuckled through the heaviness in his chest. With a dad like me? Probably. I used to imagine building her a treehouse that looked like a spaceship. I even sketched it once. Did it have blinking lights? Yeah, he said, and a little star map on the ceiling, kind of like what we're going to build now. Maya beamed, her eyes glowing. Then we'll name one of the rooms after her. Keanu stared at her, moved beyond words. You don't have to. I want to, she said quickly, because if she's anything like you, then I want every kid to know her name. For a long moment, they just sat there in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Maya leaned her head gently against his arm, her voice almost a whisper. I think Ava sent you to me. Keanu closed his eyes. His hand gently rested over hers, like anchoring something sacred. I think maybe she did too, he whispered. Then Maya said, sometimes I think about the stars not just as places we can go, but as people we've loved who watch from far away. He swallowed hard. Then she's out there, he said quietly, watching us build this together. Maya looked back at her sketch. She drew a new star on the corner of the rocket. Beside it, she wrote one word, Ava. Keanu smiled again, softer this time. That's the brightest one. They stayed there for several more minutes, letting the quiet hold them like a blanket. No one disturbed them. It was as if the world around them instinctively knew not to intrude. Not yet. Maya looked up again. Do you think you'll always miss her? Keanu nodded. I think the missing never goes away. It just changes shape. She tilted her head. What kind of shape? He thought for a moment. It used to feel like a hole. Now, it feels like a doorway. One that opens every time I meet someone like you. Maya blinked, absorbing the words. I don't think that's sad, she said. I think it's kind. He nodded slowly. It's both. She went back to drawing, then paused. Mr. K, when we open the Maya program, will you come to the first class? I'll be in the front row, he said. And will you tell the other kids about Ava? He smiled gently. Only if you tell them about your mom. Maya grinned. Deal. They shook on it, fingers curled like a secret pact between astronauts. The curtain behind them rustled as Erin peeked through. She didn't say anything, just gave a soft nod to let them know the evening was winding down. Keanu stood, stretched slightly, and extended a hand to help Maya up. Ready to head back? Maya looked at the envelope in her hand. Can I give this to Dr. Klein? She'll love it. They walked together through the curtain, back into the light and hum of the world beyond the hallway. But something had shifted between them. Not just a friendship, not just a promise. Something deeper. Keanu knew it. Maya knew it too. As they stepped back into the ballroom, a few guests were still lingering, some shaking hands, some finishing conversations, but every eye turned as the two of them passed. Keanu didn't wave, Maya didn't bow. They didn't need to. Their presence said enough. At the exit, Maya turned to him one last time and said softly, "You gave me a star tonight." Keanu knelt again and looked her in the eyes. "You gave me a reason to shine." Then she leaned forward and hugged him, and he held her close, gently, like someone holding something irreplaceable. And in that small, whispered goodbye, the memory of Ava breathed again. 3 months had passed since the night of the gala. The world hadn't forgotten. The Maya program was already taking shape in blueprints, conference calls, and quiet planning meetings held in donated spaces. Volunteers from all backgrounds had signed up: artists, engineers, retired teachers, nurses, and most importantly, children. Keanu's home, once a quiet sanctuary tucked in the Hollywood Hills, now had an extra hum of purpose. The guest house had been converted into a studio space filled with sketches, models, and glowing virtual reality prototypes. There were helmets on stands, digital renderings of lunar valleys spinning gently on monitors, and in the center of it all, a child-sized chair. Waiting. On a sunny spring afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Maya stepped out first, her frame still thin but her energy brighter. Her cheeks had color again, her steps were steadier. She was wearing a hoodie with stars stitched along the sleeves, and her small backpack had patches of planets and rockets on it. Behind her, her mother emerged, tired, always tired, but smiling. Her eyes held something new, hope that had roots. Keanu walked out to greet them. "You ready to see the stars?" he asked. Maya grinned. "Are we going to build the ceiling today?" "Better," he said. "We're going to walk on Mars." He led them inside the studio. Maya's eyes widened. She took in the moon models, the telescopes, and the projection screens, displaying simulated dust storms on the red planet. "Is this real?" she asked. "It's a prototype," Keanu said. "We're testing virtual environments that children in hospitals can use to explore space. So even if they're too sick to leave their rooms, their minds can travel anywhere." Maya slowly approached one of the headsets. "Can I try it?" Keanu gently helped her place it over her eyes. Within seconds, she gasped. "I'm standing on Mars," she said, spinning slowly. "There's a rover next to me. It's dusty." Her mother covered her mouth with both hands, emotion tightening her chest. Keanu smiled. "She's the first to see it, just like we planned." Maya pulled off the headset, stunned. "We have to show this to the others. All the kids still in bed." "We will," Keanu said. "That's what you're here for." He turned and reached for a small plaque that sat waiting on the nearby table. Keanu handed Maya the small plaque. It was simple, carved into a smooth piece of walnut wood. Etched across the front were 6 words: Star, Dreamer, Ambassador, Maya Rodriguez. Haste to Rome, one of Mirage, Sabine. She stared at it, blinking. "What's this?" "It's your new title," Keanu said warmly. "You're the very first one." Maya looked up, confused but curious. "Ambassador of what?" "Of wonder," he replied. "Of courage, of imagination. We're building something we want kids all over the country to be part of. This program, and every great program needs someone to light the way. Her mom stepped closer, eyes welling again. Keanu knelt so he was at Maya's level. "You're not just part of the project, Maya. You are the project. Your name, your story, your voice. You helped start something bigger than all of us, and now you get to help shape where it goes." Maya looked down at the plaque again, then whispered, "Will there be other ambassadors too?" "Yes," he said, "and they'll follow your lead." She held the plaque against her chest, overwhelmed. "What do I do first?" "You help us build the mobile version of this Mars experience, something we can take into hospitals and let kids see the stars, even if they can't leave their beds." Maya's eyes lit up. "We could put it on a truck." "Already working on that," he said with a smile. "It's going to be called the Star Pod. It rolls out next year. But we need your help designing what's inside." "I want a screen that curves around you," she said quickly, "like a dome. And there should be sound, too. Real space sounds." "We'll need to find those," he replied. "I've got NASA recordings on my tablet," she said. "And there's this one sound that's like a heartbeat underwater." Keanu laughed. "That's perfect." Her mother finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for seeing her, for believing in this." Keanu looked at her. "Thank you for raising someone who sees beyond pain." Maya ran back to the VR headset, now eager to try the moonwalk simulation. Keanu and her mother watched in silence as she laughed, pointed, and turned in wonder, her spirit stronger than her frame. Outside, a delivery van arrived, quietly, dropping off parts for the first learning pod. And inside, something brighter than any simulation had already taken root. By late afternoon, Maya had tested every prototype. She floated through digital craters, planted a virtual flag on the moon, and drew a constellation map that Keanu immediately pinned to the idea board. Her mother sat nearby, sipping tea that Keanu had made earlier, watching her daughter like she was seeing her for the first time in months. Laughing, focused, alive. Keanu walked over and placed a binder in Maya's hands. Inside were concept sketches, notes from engineers, and feedback from pediatric doctors across the country. "We've already started building the first hospital learning pod in San Diego," he told her. "They want your input." Maya turned the pages slowly, eyes scanning the colorful diagrams and labeled designs. "It needs a quiet corner," she said thoughtfully. "A place where kids who are scared can sit without being asked questions." Keanu made a note immediately. "And maybe a button," she added, "that lets them play messages from other kids, so they don't feel alone." He looked up at her, heart swelling. "You're designing more than tech. You're designing hope." Maya didn't respond. She was busy sketching something new on the back of a spare blueprint. When she turned it around, it was a logo. A star with two hands reaching toward it, one big, one small. "Can we use this for the program?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "We already are." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Keanu walked Maya and her mother out to their car. Before they left, Maya turned to him and said, "Do you think other kids will want to join?" "They already are," he replied. In the weeks following Maya's visit, stories began pouring in. A boy with cystic fibrosis in Ohio asked if he could lead virtual moonwalks for other kids from his hospital bed. A girl recovering from leukemia in Arizona sent in her own Mars rover designs. A young artist in Seattle began painting planets for the pod interior. The Maya program had become more than an idea. It was a movement, a galaxy of young dreamers, each one once silent, now reaching, now designing, now leading. And at the heart of it all, a girl with a quiet voice and a pocket full of stars had lit the fuse. The ballroom looked the same, but everything about it felt different. The chandeliers still sparkled, the velvet drapes still shimmered. The same host stood at the same podium, But this year the energy pulsed with something more powerful than money or names on donor walls. It pulsed with purpose. 1 year had passed since Maya stood barefoot on that stage, holding a crumpled napkin and a trembling voice. Now the spotlight returned, but the girl who stepped into it was transformed. She wore a navy moule jumpsuit decorated with small embroidered stars. Her hair was longer now, her steps stronger. Her voice no longer quivered. The applause began the moment she appeared, and it didn't stop. Seated among the audience, Keanu leaned slightly forward in his chair, his eyes locked on the stage. He didn't wave. He didn't rise. He simply watched her with the quiet reverence of someone who knew exactly how much courage this moment had taken. Maya stepped to the microphone and took a breath. She looked out over a room packed with dignitaries, doctors, donors, and dozens of children, some in wheelchairs, some in hospital gowns, all seated front row by design. "My name is Maya Rodriguez," she began, voice clear and even, "and I am the first Star Dreamer ambassador." Applause followed, but she lifted her hand gently, and it faded. "Last year," she continued, "I stood on this stage scared and sick. I had just come out of surgery. I didn't know if I'd ever go back to school or see a future that felt bigger than a hospital bed." She paused, letting that truth rest in the room. "But someone saw me, not as a patient, not as a case, just as a person." She looked toward Keanu in the crowd, his expression softened, eyes shining. "$1 later, didn't ask what I could offer. He didn't pity me. He asked what I dreamed about." She smiled slightly. "And he told me my answer mattered." The room was silent, fully captured. "So tonight," she said, "I'm not here to ask for help. I'm here to show you what your help already did." She turned toward a large screen behind her. "This is what happens when one moment of kindness becomes a movement." The lights dimmed as the video began. The screen behind Maya flickered to life. It opened with footage of a hospital room in Sao Paulo, where a young boy lay beneath a blanket, wearing a VR headset. His lips moved as he narrated a spacewalk in Portuguese, his voice broadcast to a room full of children seated in wheelchairs. They laughed, pointed, and reached for imaginary stars. Then came footage from Nairobi. A nurse wheeled a mobile star pod into a cancer ward. Inside, children explored a projection of Saturn's rings. One girl turned to the camera and whispered, "I feel like I left Earth." The screen cycled through dozens more: a rooftop in Manila, a children's hospital in Toronto, a converted bus in rural Kentucky. Everywhere it went, the star pod wasn't just a program, it was a portal. It gave children something medicine couldn't: hope with velocity. Text appeared on the screen in glowing white letters. 4,000 children served. 12 countries reached. 100+ hospital partners. One dream. The screen faded to black. The lights rose. Maya stood still for a moment, letting the numbers settle. "This is not just about science," she said. "It's about dignity. It's about kids who feel invisible, learning they matter, that their ideas count, that their voices are not small." She glanced back at the crowd of children in the front row. Many of them were clapping already, some holding signs with the word STAR written in glitter and crayon. "I want to thank every hospital, every donor, and every person who believed this could work," Maya continued. "But most of all, I want to thank the person who asked me to help build it." She turned again toward Keanu. "You didn't just rescue a child, you listened to one." Keanu's lips pressed together, holding back the weight in his chest. Around him, several audience members wiped their eyes. Maya lifted a hand toward him, gesturing for him to stand. "Mr. Keanu Reeves," she said, her voice steady, "this dream belongs to you too." Reluctantly, he rose, offering only a small bow of his head. The crowd erupted into cheers, not for a celebrity, but for the man who had quietly set a child's world back in motion. Papa. No. The applause didn't stop. Maya waited. She still had more to say. As the applause began to fade, Maya took one final step closer to the microphone. "I've been asked if I still want to go to Mars," she said with a small smile. "The answer is yes. But now, I want to take a lot more people with me." Laughter and light applause rippled through the room. She continued, her tone more serious. "We've learned something powerful this year. That you don't have to leave Earth to escape pain. Sometimes, you just need someone to show you that your dreams still matter, even when you're hurting." A pause. "I used to think I was just one sick girl in a big world. Now I know I was one light in a whole sky full of stars." The front row of children sat straighter. One little boy reached up and touched the patch on his hoodie that read, "Star Dreamer Crew." Maya's voice softened. "If you're a kid out there who feels invisible, if you're lying in a hospital bed wondering if anyone will ever ask what you dream about, I want you to know this. You're not alone, and your answer is waiting to be heard." The crowd fell silent again. Maya stepped back from the mic, her words lingering. Then the host returned to the stage. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. "Ladies and gentlemen, what began last year as an ordinary gala has become something far greater. And tonight, we not only celebrate the success of the Maya program, we celebrate its future." He turned toward the children's section. "And we look forward to every new ambassador who will rise from these very front row seats." As the music swelled and the next portion of the program began, guests around the ballroom reached for donation forms, not with guilt or pressure, but with clarity, with joy. Keanu remained near the back, watching Maya return to her seat among the other children. When she sat down, the girl beside her reached out and held her hand. Keanu smiled. She didn't need the spotlight anymore. She had become one, and now the light she carried was being passed. Quietly, powerfully, one child at a time. After the final speech and the standing ovations, after the stage lights dimmed and the crowd began filtering out through velvet-curtained exits, Keanu found a quiet hallway behind the stage. He waited near a storage room lined with folded chairs and unused floral arrangements. The noise from the ballroom softened into echoes. A moment later, Maya appeared. She had taken off her heels and carried them in one hand, her Star Dreamer Ambassador badge still hanging around her neck. Her hair had started to fall slightly from its braid, and a faint flush lingered on her cheeks from the spotlight. When she saw Keanu waiting, she smiled instantly. "I was looking for you. I was hoping you'd come back here," he replied. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, deep blue velvet box. "I have something for you," he said. "It's not for the stage, it's just from me." Maya looked up at him, eyes wide, then gently accepted the box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, thin but beautifully made. Engraved along the curved side were the words, "To the girl who reached the stars." Maya stared at it, silent. Then she lifted her eyes to his, and for a moment neither of them said a word. The weight of what they'd been through, of what they had built together, wrapped around them like a blanket in the quiet space. She threw her arms around him without hesitation. Keanu held her, closing his eyes as her small frame leaned into his chest. After a moment, she whispered, "You were never just a waiter." He chuckled softly, his voice catching. "You were the one person who saw me," she continued. He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze. "And you helped me see myself again." Maya wiped a tear from her cheek and looked back down at the bracelet. She carefully slid it onto her wrist, holding it up under the soft hallway lights. The silver caught the glow and shimmered gently. "I'll never take it off," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "But even if you do, just remember what it means." She nodded. "No cameras," she said with a smile. "Just real love." Maya turned the bracelet slowly around her wrist, reading the engraving again and again. Each time her eyes traced the words, her smile deepened. Not because of the gift itself, but because of who had given it and why. Keanu leaned against the wall beside her, his voice quiet. "You know, I almost didn't show up that night." Maya glanced up at him. "The gala?" He nodded. "I told myself I was too tired, that I wouldn't be useful, that it would just be another event where people talked but didn't change." She tilted her head, curious. "So, why did you come?" He hesitated, then said, "Because something inside me kept thinking about a story I read once. About a girl who looked at Mars and didn't just wish, she built." She blinked. "You read about me before we met?" He smiled. "A short article buried in a hospital newsletter. Your name was in it once, but your voice, it was everywhere." Maya sat down on a nearby step. "I didn't think anyone saw that story." "I saw it," Keanu said. "And I saw you." They sat quietly for a moment. The echo of laughter and music from the ballroom faded entirely as more guests left. The world slowed around them, just enough to feel timeless. "Do you think," Maya asked slowly, "that we'll keep doing this forever?" He looked at her. "Bleh." She nodded. "Helping kids, building space stuff, dreaming big." He smiled again. "If you're in, I'm in." Maya looked down at the bracelet once more. "Then I guess I have everything I need." He gently reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Well, maybe. One more thing." She opened it. A hand-drawn sketch. A dome-shaped mobile lab with stars across the top, a telescope sticking out of the side, and a sign over the entrance that read, "Dream Dock 1." Maya gasped. "Is this the next one?" "It will be, if you approve." She studied the design. "Needs more glitter. And a snack bar." Keanu laughed. "Done." She leaned her head against his shoulder and sighed. "I like this part the best." "What part?" she whispered. "The part after the noise, when it's just us." Keanu closed his eyes for a second, then nodded. "Me too." For a while they sat in that quiet corner, away from everything else, just two people who had unknowingly saved each other. No flashing lights, no autographs, just peace. Maya eventually stood up, stretching her arms as she looked down at the silver bracelet again. "Do you think the other ambassadors will get one too?" she asked playfully. Keanu grinned. "If you think they've earned it." She smirked. "Then yes. But they have to promise to listen first. And be kind. Especially that last one," he agreed. Footsteps echoed down the hall. It was Maya's mother, smiling gently as she approached. "Ready to head home?" she asked. Maya nodded. "Yeah, but can we stop by the science center tomorrow?" Keanu raised a brow. "Already planning the next pod?" Maya gave him a small shrug and a grin. "Always." Her mom gave Keanu a grateful glance. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head softly. "She's the one leading now. I'm just helping build the road." Before leaving, Maya turned once more and looked at him. "Will you be at the next one? The gala? The opening of the next center?" "I'll be wherever you are," Keanu said without hesitation. She smiled deeply. "Then I'm not scared anymore." She walked toward the exit with her mom, her steps light, her frame stronger than anyone could have imagined a year ago. Keanu stood there for a moment longer, his hands tucked into his pockets, letting the silence settle. The hallway was empty now, but his heart was full. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second bracelet, identical, same silver, same engraving. He turned it over in his hand, then slipped it onto his wrist. "To the girl who reached the stars." He whispered the words aloud, not for anyone else, just for himself. And in that moment, the man who had once knelt beside a crying child with nothing more than a napkin and a quiet heart understood something he hadn't before. He hadn't just changed her life. She had given his a new beginning. And sometimes, that's how healing happens. not with grand gestures or loud declarations, but in quiet corners, silver bracelets and whispered promises that never fade. In the weeks that followed the second gala, something unusual happened. Donations didn't just trickle in, they flooded. Not just from celebrities or corporations, but from everyday people. A retired teacher in Vermont mailed a handwritten check for $50 with a note. "My granddaughter watches the stars now because of Maya." A single mom in Nevada donated $10 monthly, writing, "We don't have much, but my son wants to be part of the galaxy." The Maya program's inbox overflowed. Hospitals from South Africa, India, Norway, Chile, and even small island nations began reaching out. "Can we bring star pods to our children?" they asked. "Can Maya visit virtually? How can we become part of the movement?" Engineers and artists, many of them volunteers, worked nights and weekends designing the next generation of portable learning pods. Each pod had a child's fingerprint engraved into the interior wall, a symbol that their touch shaped the design. And Keanu? He quietly vanished from the spotlight. Reporters tried to reach him for interviews. News anchors wanted quotes, but Keanu declined every request. He didn't sit on panels or accept awards. He didn't pose beside the star pods for glossy magazine spreads. Instead, he showed up at warehouses in jeans and worn boots, helping install equipment. He met with nurses on their breaks. He asked kids what colors made them feel happy. He took notes. He adjusted blueprints. No cameras followed him. That was the point. He believed in something better than fame. Impact without applause. Meanwhile, Maya was becoming something no one could have predicted. She wasn't a viral story anymore. She was a voice, a symbol. Schools invited her to speak remotely. Children wrote to her by the hundreds. She responded to as many as she could, always signing with "Keep Reaching." News outlets picked up her story again, this time focusing on her leadership, not just her illness. They called her the Star Builder, the girl who reached back, the ambassador of belief. But Maya never got caught in the noise. She stayed grounded, still drawing, still dreaming, still visiting hospitals virtually to speak to other children with soft voices and stubborn hearts. And soon, her voice would reach farther than anyone had imagined. One afternoon, Maya's mother found her in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by letters. Envelopes covered the carpet, some crayon-colored, others typed. Many written in shaky handwriting from hospital beds around the world. Maya was reading them one by one, occasionally smiling, sometimes quietly crying. Her mother asked gently, "Is it ever too much?" Maya shook her head. "It's never too much. It's just heavy sometimes, but the good kind." That evening, Maya turned on her tablet camera and opened a document where she had typed a single line weeks earlier. "If someone believes in your dreams, hold on to them." She pressed record and began speaking. "Hi, I'm Maya Rodriguez. Some of you know me as the Star Dreamer Ambassador. But really, I'm just a girl who got lucky. Not because I got better, but because someone saw me before I did." She looked directly into the lens. "There was a time when I thought dreams were just distractions from pain, but now I know dreams are how you survive pain." Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes glistened. "So if someone believes in your dreams, hold on to them. That belief might carry you all the way to Mars, or into a classroom, or to a friend who needs you." She smiled softly. "You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be famous to matter. You just have to care. And keep going." She paused. "And if you feel alone, remember this. There's a room of stars waiting for you. We're building it, and your name belongs there." She ended the recording and sent it to the Maya program team with a single instruction: "For any child who needs it." The video went further than they expected. Hospitals began playing it during morning rounds. School counselors used it in assemblies. A space agency in Europe requested permission to include her message in a children's broadcast from the International Space Station. Within 2 weeks, her words had been translated into 27 languages. But Maya didn't track the views, she didn't count the shares. She just hoped one child, somewhere, would hear it and sit up a little straighter. And Keanu, watching quietly from his home studio, listened to the recording with tears silently falling. It was more than a message. It was a map. From rural clinics in Kansas to orphanages in Cambodia, the ripple traveled farther than any one person could follow. A young girl in Syria, recovering from trauma and illness, watched Maya's video on a borrowed tablet and whispered the closing line to herself. A boy in Argentina recorded his own message in response, thanking Maya for putting stars back in his sky. In a village in Uganda, children painted a mural of a girl in space boots reaching toward Saturn, with Maya's quote written beneath it in bold white letters. The program had sparked something much deeper than technology. It had redefined what it meant to heal. The Maya program grew not because of marketing, but because it gave people a way to love out loud. Teachers built cardboard rocket simulators for kids too sick to leave the classroom. Parents wrote to say that their children, once withdrawn, were now talking about constellations and dreaming up inventions. One letter read, "My daughter said, 'If Maya can dream, I can too.' That was the first time she spoke in 3 months." Keanu remained behind the scenes, declining press, still showing up at build sites with rolled-up sleeves and a quiet focus. He helped install solar panels on one of the new learning pods. He helped paint the walls of another with glowing stars, Maya's design. He once drove 6 hours to personally deliver a star pod to a hospital that couldn't afford shipping. He said little, but he was always there. And Maya? She was still drawing, still designing. She now led a small junior dreamer council, made up of kids from all over the world who had been through hardship and still chose hope. At one meeting, a boy with a prosthetic leg from New Mexico said, "I don't want to be fixed. I just want to matter." Maya nodded and replied, "You already do." That was the entire philosophy behind the program, not to fix, but to see, to honor, to believe. And so the ripple kept moving, past borders, past grief, past language, carried by the very thing Maya had come to represent: quiet bravery, and the idea that the smallest voice, when believed in, can shake the sky. The house was quiet. Keanu sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp casting a soft glow over an open notebook. A cup of coffee steamed beside him, untouched. The world outside had faded to dusk. Birds had gone still. Cars were gone from the street. It was the kind of silence that asks for reflection. He picked up his pen and began to write. Sometimes the greatest service you can offer is listening. He paused after the sentence, letting it sit on the page. There was nothing profound about the words, but they felt true. And in recent months, truth had become the compass by which he moved. He thought back to the night he knelt beside Maya. The juice spill, the forgotten napkin. How simple the moment had seemed, how enormous it had become. Not because he did something great, but because he noticed. He turned the page and continued writing. You don't need to fix the world to change it. You just need to stay still long enough to see someone who thinks they're invisible. The images flooded back. Maya walking on Mars in VR goggles, her speech at the second gala, the bracelet, her whisper, "You were never just a waiter." Keanu smiled faintly. On the wall beside the table hung a small collection of photographs. One was of Ava, the daughter he never got to raise, bundled in soft light. The other was Maya, standing at the entrance of the first star pod, grinning beneath a banner that read, "Reach further." 2 girls, 2 galaxies, both held in the quiet places of his heart. He reached for the notebook again. Not every hero wears a cape. Some carry trays, some carry fears, some carry children through the hardest hours of their lives, and some, like Maya, carry stars in their pockets, and hand them out to the world, without even knowing it. He leaned back in his chair, letting the stillness settle. Outside the window, a breeze moved through the trees. He closed the notebook and set the pen down gently, then stood, stretched, and made his way toward the door. There was still light outside, and more listening left to do. Keanu stepped out onto the porch and stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp evening air. The world had grown quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full. With memory, with meaning, with the echoes of moments that had shaped him. He walked slowly into the yard, hands in his pockets, passing the small garden where he'd once sat thinking he had nothing left to give. That seemed like a lifetime ago now. The stars had begun to peek through the deep blue sky. He looked up at them and smiled, remembering Maya's words. How she once said, "The stars might be the people we've loved, watching from far away." He whispered to the sky, "Thank you, Ava." There was no reply. There didn't need to be. The gratitude lived in his chest. The ground beneath his feet was the same earth he had always walked, but his path had changed. It wasn't about the next role or the next award. It was about presence, about building something lasting, even if his name wasn't attached to it. He paused beside a tree and watched as the wind caught its leaves. In the distance, a child's voice echoed from a nearby home. Laughter, then footsteps. Keanu listened. Every sound mattered now. Every sound was someone's life unfolding. He looked back toward the house, saw the soft light still glowing from the window, and thought about all the children like Maya, waiting in hospital beds, wondering if their dreams still mattered. They did, because someone believed. He turned and walked back up the steps, slower this time. Each step was deliberate, grounded. At the door, he glanced over his shoulder one more time, eyes lingering on the sky. He whispered, "Keep watching." Inside, the notebook waited. So did plans, new designs, letters to respond to, kids to visit, volunteers to guide. But for now, he carried only one thing with him as he crossed the threshold again. Stillness, the kind that comes not from giving up, but from giving completely. And in that stillness, he found something he hadn't felt in a long time. Later that night, Keanu sat at his desk once more. The notebook was closed now, but a new letter sat before him. One he had written to Maya. He would send it tomorrow, folded inside a box filled with new stargazer materials for her next project. It simply read, "You help me remember that grace doesn't need to be seen to be real. Keep dreaming loudly, even when the world is quiet. I'll always be listening." He tucked it into the envelope, sealed it, and placed it on the corner of the desk. Then he leaned back, letting the silence return. It struck him again just how much had changed in 1 year. The girl who once stood trembling on a stage had become a voice for thousands. The man who once arrived as a background presence had found a front-row seat to purpose. Not because of fame, but because he chose to see, chose to serve, chose to listen. The bracelet still rested on his wrist, the engraving soft with wear. To the girl who reached the stars. He touched it gently, then stood and walked toward the hallway. The wall, the photos of Maya and Ava glowed faintly in the soft light. He didn't speak this time. He just nodded, quietly honoring them both. And then he disappeared into the quiet of the house, his presence no longer needed on a stage, but still pulsing behind every child who dared to imagine something more. Because sometimes, that's what real love looks like. Not loud, not scripted, but steady. And when it comes, it changes more than one life. It builds a new world. Have you ever met someone who changed your life with a small act of kindness? Maybe they listened when no one else did. Maybe they believed in your dream when you almost let go. We'd love to hear about them. Share your story in the comments below and let us know. What story would you like to see next with Keanu Reeves? Because sometimes one small voice becomes the one the world remembers. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.